The authors of the contributed papers will present their work with 4-minute short presentations. The posters will be in the back, so please go and ask questions to the authors during the poster sessions. We will go through the papers in the appearance, in the order of appearance as it is on the website. So maybe during one talk, if the next presenter can already prepare. So the next one will be Arunkumar Byravan from Dieter Fox's lab. But for now, Alexander Broad is going to give his talk. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is my talk, and I'm going to come down on the using deep learning as a tool portion for this talk. So it's really, this is going to be pretty simple, and the idea here is just to sort of combine some very well-working tools into a quick system for object detection in domestic table environments. Okay, so in this work, as I mentioned, we're interested in tackling the object detection problem in robotics. I could sort of motivate that a little bit more, but since this is quick, I'm just going to kind of blow through that and assume you guys care about object detection. So in recent years, we've seen object detection have a lot of progress because of deep learning from learning features from large data sets. And we're curious about like the analogous problem in robotics. So there are a few, and some of the, I think some of the pictures might get messed up. But so there's a few notable differences between object detection and computer vision and robotics. The main two are that localization has to happen in 3 dimensions now instead of 2 or 6 dimensions, I guess. And there's even a greater focus on real-time processing. But the question remains, can we have the same sort of state-of-the-art recognition performance that deep learning researchers have produced in the computer vision community in robotics? And can we do it without the same types of widely distributed data sets? Okay, so here's our approach, and it's very simple. We rely on the fact that cheap RGBD sensors like the Microsoft Kinect offer both color and depth data in a single sensor under a static transform. Therefore, to quickly and accurately detect objects in a scene, we exploit known geometric features in the scene and localize each object in 3 dimensions, and then transform the bounding boxes defined to enclose each object in the scene into its 2-dimensional representation in the image space. We can then just feed those patches through a standard ConvNet classifier, and using the geometry of the objects themselves to automatically account for the object, it automatically accounts for the object position and scale by performing object recognition. And by performing object recognition in the image space, we can directly leverage advances from the computer vision community. Of note, the particular geometric features that I'm referring to in this work is the fact that we expect all objects to sort of lie on a dominant plane, like a table or the floor or a desk. Okay, so to validate our approach, we quickly developed a few test scenarios. Our data set consisted of 11 unique objects, mostly taken from the YCB object data set. And in this first set of so in the 2 experiments, we essentially placed objects in random places and orientations on a table, and we varied how many objects were on the table at a given time. And then we collected count data to present the accuracy of our results. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. So here are some pictorial examples of the system working. You can see the count data on the right. So the system works pretty reliably and is very easy to set up. The only case of failure that we found was when we accidentally put a red mug in the scene, which was not one of the objects in our training set, and it labeled it incorrectly. So that sort of highlights a reason that we'll need to handle objects that aren't in our training set more appropriately. Also, from a speed factor, our implementation runs at 12 hertz, which is very fast compared to a lot of the vision-only approaches, considering they have to sort of segment the scene or use another proposal region method for actually deciding where to look for objects. Okay, so then one last thing quickly before I turn this over. This can also be used to actually create data sets. So if you just use the localization method in this approach and put a single object on in your scene, this localization method can be used to sort of store data at different positions and orientations and under different lighting conditions to then train a neural net. So if you have objects that aren't in a widely distributed data set, you can create your own set this way. And last point, the code is available on GitHub, so if you guys want to play around with it, feel free. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Arun. I'm from the University of Washington. I'm going to be talking about SE3 nets. So this is more about putting structure explicitly into deep nets. So the problem that we're trying to tackle is to use deep learning for predicting changes to scenes when under the effect of forces. So for example, in this case, if the robot actually wants to move the objects around, it needs to be able to predict what's going to happen if it applies some forces on those objects. And that's what our network basically tries to capture. More specifically, we try to capture the motion of rigid bodies under the action of forces. So to give a brief high-level picture, so our network takes as input a 3D point cloud. So this is like a 3-channel image along with some sort of a force. So in this case, let's say somebody is pushing the ball. Given this, our network tries to predict how the scene is going to change at the next time step. So on the right is the image where all the points in the left image have moved under the action of this particular force. Internal to the network, the way it's represented is it splits this computation into 2 separate parts. One is it's trying to see where in the scene objects actually move. So for example, in this case, the box, ball, and the background are also moving separately. And so this is like a classification problem almost, where the network tries to predict which objects move together and how. The second part is it tries to see how things are moving in the scene now that it knows what things are moving. And that's parameterized as an explicit rigid body transform, so it predicts a sequence of rigid body transforms here. And by combining both of these, you can essentially go from the input image to what we have on the right. I'm going to skip the evaluation and go directly to results. So we tested this on a bunch of simulated tasks where the point is you're given an input image and then there's force applied to it. You want to predict what happens 0.15 or 0.2 seconds into the future. So in this case, the top row shows the reconstructed depth images. The second row shows the flow errors, and the bottom row shows optical flow. And we compare against a system that actually directly predicts optical flow. And as you can see, our system gives really sharp results, and it's able to track the object pretty well, even when it's undergoing lots of crazy motions like toppling and so on. Additionally, it's also able to figure out that both the ball and the box are separate objects, and also background also is separate. There's no explicit input that says that the network has to do that, but it explicitly figures that out based on the structure. We also tested on scenes with multiple objects which have different shapes, different masses, and things like that, and it's able to generalize to all these cases. So let me go to the next results, which is, in this case, we have a camera looking at the Baxter robot, which is moving its arm, and there's about 1 to 4 joints that are being actuated at random. Yeah, and so if you see here, it's in this case predicting that there's only one salient competitive motion, which is that particular arm moving, whereas in this case there's more than one, and so on. In general, compared to the flow data sets, our predictions are much sharper, and it's also pretty accurate overall. So finally, we test on a sequential prediction task where we take the output from the network and then feed it back sequentially just to see how well the system does. And in a task like this, a network like the flow network is going to accrue error significantly as you go across time, whereas our network's predictions stay pretty consistent, and things don't blow up as you would expect with like a flow-based approach. So in conclusion, we have a network that's able to capture rigid body motion under the effect of forces. And if you have more questions, please come talk to me at the poster.
The last slide.
Hello, my name is Daniel DeTone. Today I'll be talking about collaborative work with myself and my 2 colleagues, Tomasz Malisiewicz and Andrew Rabinovich, and we'll be talking about a deep learning based approach for doing homography estimation. First, I'll say a couple words about Magic Leap. So at Magic Leap, we're making a mixed reality device. From a research perspective, we work on a variety of computer vision problems. And a significant amount of that is an investment into deep learning. And we're hiring interns and full-times on a rolling basis. So if you're interested, please come find me. The traditional homography estimation pipeline typically involves two stages. First, there is a feature detection stage in which Harris, SIFT, or orb features are computed in both images. Then, next, there is a matching stage in which the descriptors for these detections are compared, and the best matches are found, typically via a robust estimator such as Ransack. This system works pretty well, but there are many kind of quote-unquote degenerate configurations. In this case, there are very few corner detections, which would be computed in both images, and there may be many repeated matches due to repeated textures such as trees. It's not clear how to solve problems like this with traditional feature engineering. We took basically a standard off-the-shelf OpenCV orb plus Ransack homography estimator, and in this case, it failed due to having not enough matches. To this end, we proposed to do end-to-end geometry learning of the homography. So the idea is the input to the network is a pair of images, the output is the homography. There's no explicit feature detection or matching stage. We train these networks and we call them homography networks. So in this degenerate configuration that I showed earlier, the deep network has no problem. I'd encourage you all to come learn more at the poster. I'll go into more depth with a more in-depth evaluation of the homography net versus the orb plus Ransack approach, in which the deep network performs better on the average. I'll show you how you can train these homography nets without the need for manual labeling, which is typically a big issue when applying deep networks to a new problem. I'll show you tips and tricks on how you can parameterize the homography to make learning work well. And I'll show you some new results and demos that you can't find online. Thank you.
You said it right there.
It's coming up. All right. I could just look back. Okay. Just a minute. All right, I just present like that. Hi, I'm Theo Weber. I work at Google DeepMind, and I'm going to talk about a 10 infer repeat fast scene understanding using generative models. Okay, so generative models have done, deep learning has contributed a lot recently in generative models, leading to state-of-the-art image models that allow you to basically create embeddings that understand the scene. But, sorry, I wish that I could, all right. But the one problem with these representations, so these codes that like variational and tone coders create, is that they create entangled code. So you have this complex vector of representation, which is not very helpful in understanding which objects is where and what are the identities and so on. And so it would not be sufficient for a robot to use, for instance, for doing grasping or counting or all these kind of tasks that really require understanding this notion of objectness. So this work is in a framework of unsupervised learning. So the only thing that we're going to provide the algorithm is images, and the hope is that we can get some kind of scene representation of the image. So instead of going for a fully entangled representation, we're going to assume a generative model which has some structure. It's a probabilistic generative model. It could be a neural net, but it could be something else, where there's going to be an explicit notion of position of objects, their location, and their identities. So a sort of what-where representation with which disentangles across objects. So this is the top-down model, but I focus more on the bottom-up. So we can have these models, but the hard part about them is doing inference. And so this work is largely by the inference network, which provide fast inference for these models. And there is 2 ingredients, or 3 depending on how you count. The first one is attention using spatial transformer networks. So spatial transformer are differentiable neural networks which take an image and a position or some kind of description of a location where you wish to look at, so some sort of bounding box, sorry, and produce a zoomed-in version of the image. And so this is fully differentiable, and so you can produce the input parameters of the spatial transformer, in particular the location where you wish to look at. And so once you have a zoomed-in location of the object, you can try to encode it into a WAD code. So that's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is recurrence. So there might be several objects in an image, and so you want to attend to one object at a time. So we have this recurrent network, an LSTM or some other recurrent network, which one step at a time is going to attend to a part of the image and find an object, describe it, and then go on into the next step. This prevents, the memory of the neural network prevents describing the same object twice. And another aspect of this recurrence is that I described this bottom-up network as a what-where representation, but in fact there is a third element to it, which is a stop bit. So there might be a variable number of objects in an image, and so the way we do this is we output a stop bit which interrupts the recurrence. So it outputs the 1 when it wants to go on, and when the neural networks decide that it has seen every object in the scene, it outputs a 0, gets the entire representation of objects, in this case 2 objects that it has seen, and uses a decoder to reconstruct the scene. And the entire loss will be driven end-to-end from the image back to the image through the scene representation in the center. So we use this on a probabilistic render and effectively perform inverse graphics, fast amortized inverse graphics, and show that, so on the top row you have artificial images of top-down scenes, tabletop scenes, sorry, and at the bottom layer you have the reconstruction provided by air. So you can see that it accurately finds the pose, the number, and the location of the objects. And we have some early results on transfer to real images where you have photos of plates on the top and reconstruction at the bottom. That's it.
Okay, hi. Consider the following problem. You have a robot exposed to a complex real-world scenario. Lots of stuff moving around, lots of different object types, lots of different object dynamics, lots of interaction dynamics, something you would really struggle with writing down in the plant model. And in this particular work, we ask ourselves 2 questions. We pose 2 challenges which seem unrelated, but we explicitly link them here. One, can a robot basically from a partially observable view of the world in such a complex scenario learn something about the dynamics of the scene? So can it predict, for example, through occlusions in a consistent manner how the objects will evolve? And secondly, and do this in a completely unsupervised way. And secondly, in a manner completely efficient in terms of the data that it uses, if there is a supervisory signal, can it then infer what these things are? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So this work builds on our own prior work on deep tracking, which has been around for about a year or so. The idea there really is that it is a neural network incarnation of a Bayes filter. So what this thing really does is state estimation. When we first brought out deep tracking, it was mainly on synthetic data. So in synthetic data set like this, pretty simple. And the challenge that we posed ourselves intellectually here is how do we actually scale that to the real world? And so things that we need to consider are things like a multitude of sizes and shapes of things that we're interested in, multitude of velocities. We have static obstacles, variable length occlusions, longer occlusions, that sort of stuff. And it turns out that if you really want to make a go of that, the original deep tracking RNN architecture needs a significant upgrade. And I'll tell you more about that at the poster if you're interested, but to give you the highlights, we use stack dilated convolutions to increase the field of attention of the network exponentially for linear constant parameters. We use, in this work, non-constant bias terms to better represent static objects. We use gated recurrent memory, which is basically an LSTM variant, doesn't really matter which one, to deal with longer-term occlusions. And what pops out the other end is basically almost a multi-hypothesis sort of version of an occupancy grid of what goes on in the real world, where the individual things, so if you look at the black bits, which are the occluded bits, you see that the individual entities that move through the occlusions are actually tracked while they're occluded. We benchmark this against our own deep tracking work. So we're in blue here, our own deep tracking work in orange. We beat that with the updated architecture. We also compare it against a state-of-the-art, more traditional approach of model-free tracking in the literature. And both methods outperform that quite a bit. But the really interesting question for us is, can we exploit the underlying representation in a data-efficient manner? So far, everything you've seen is completely unsupervised. Okay, so you can walk away, you come back, the system has learned something about the environment. Now, if we were to provide a little bit of supervisory data, we can exploit a mechanism called inductive transfer, which is basically a byproduct of multitask learning, to say, okay, well, if we learn a classifier based on the hidden representation that we've learned as part of the tracking, then actually with that more expressive, more complete representation, we can use fewer training data to come up with a better classification performance. And that's basically what you see here. And what that buys us is basically pretty good classification performance, both in precision and recall. I think the only massive confusions that we get here are pedestrians and cyclists, which kind of makes sense because they can look similar and they can move similarly in this sort of environment. So that is fine. If we benchmark this from the bottom up, where we train a classifier on the same labeled data based on the raw input data, we get significantly worse performance. So that's basically it. So come and see me at the poster. I'll be delighted to tell you more.
Thank you, Ingmar. Next paper is Learning Hand-Eye Coordination for Robotic Grasping with Deep Learning and Large-Scale Data Collection.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Peter Pastor, and this is work done at Google by Sergey Levine, Alex Krasevsky, and Deirdre. So when this project started, it was Sergey that said, okay, let's do a deep learning project, and for that we need lots of data. And the idea was basically to just put a lot of robots in the room and have them run day and night. We make smart choices about the task we consider, that is, so that it's self-evaluating, meaning it can just run by itself unattended overnight and on weekends. And we had, by chance, access to a lot of robots, and so we basically went down that road. And when we were thinking about the task, it was important to us that we can evaluate whether this task was successful, and we did that by basically whether we can close the gripper, or we also presented it to the image and can classify whether we detected something. There's an RGB sensor, a camera that takes an image, and the whole project started out with was inspired by Abhinav Gupta, and the task was, okay, find the grass post given an image, and that didn't excite me, and luckily the robot was not very accurate, so it simply wouldn't work because the robot would just be a few centimeters off, and so we had to put the gripper and the robot in the image and learn corrections to that. And what over time we started to do more and more choices, and eventually we had a hand-eye coordination system that was independent of camera calibration. And as we were collecting more and more data, and we would train a model and a bigger model, the robot would start to make very interesting choices. Like he would, for example, you saw these blue objects, and he would start to distinguish between the foam, where it would easily be able to pick it up by poking it into the sponge, and other objects that would it would have to just push it around. You also saw where it would push objects around and grasp them this way, or translucent objects. Here you see a more rigorous experiment where we had the robot, or we would compare it to the open loop situation where we would just go down and grasp once. Here we would, I'm losing it. Okay, maybe a few things that need to know that is important. The robot doesn't pick up a specific object. It picks up any object, as you can see, and it tends to like bigger objects first, and as the okay, maybe I just jumped to a conclusion, sorry. So the three things that I think that I learned from it was when you start collecting large amounts of data, the behavior that you get, at least for the scene that you see, was very robust. It literally worked for objects, for the large amounts of different kinds of objects we had. Obviously, it is all dependent on sort of that setting with this robot and that camera. What helped a lot was the fact that we learned across different robots was make it able that it would work on each of them. And also, what got me excited was the fast inference. Allows you to run inference in a visual motor control loop, so at 2 to 5 hertz, and you can create very interesting reactive behaviors with that. Sorry.
Thank you, Peter. And our next paper is low-cost visually intelligent robots with EOT.
My name is Declan Peña, and we are working on one project called EOT. We are trying to give eyes to everything. Before, we had depth camera sensors or for calculating optical flow. We have a very low power chip, and it's very nice because it has 12 GPUs inside, and everything using less than 1 watt. Is the brain, is the media chip from Movidius. Now we started to design low-cost robots. Our aim is to have a less than $100 robotics kit that you can give to students, to hobbyists, and they can start working in robotics immediately without having a depth knowledge about deep learning or feature point tracking. In this case, we have a small drone that is carrying the Phantom. The chip is embedded in a USB stick, and the quadcopter is able to run it. It can run around 8 minutes on the battery. It's very light. It's less than 10 grams. We have other small cars, robot cars, the Cherokee, and some steering car. We have automatic. Let me see if I can. In this case, we have automatic hovering. Everything is processed on board. The platform is offline, and the media chip is processing everything on the robot. We also have feature point tracking. We take as input a 640 image. We detect the points. We create the descriptor. We calculate the optical flow. And we can do tracking everything offline, everything on the robot. This is the nice thing. And our platform, we can take deep networks or neural networks from Café, from TensorFlow, using the Phantom framework. We created this framework in order to facilitate everybody to use the computing power we have at very low power over there. We have drones. We are working on drones. We are working on augmented reality and virtual reality headsets, on robotics, on security cameras for tracking. Everything is, the most important feature is the low power that we have and the high computing power. For this case, for the IoT stack, everything is accessible through MicroPython. So it's very easy to use. Just call a model, import IoT. Now I'm using this robot, move left. We have MQTT, Wi-Fi, motor control, Phantom for deep neural networks, the BitTrack for feature point tracking. We have SLAM based on BOLA, volumetric data. We have working with structural light, with time-of-flight cameras. Everything is running on Artems. It's a real-time operating system. Well, if you have more questions about the project, please come to the poster. Thank you very much.
And our next paper is deep learning for laser-based odometry estimation.
Hi, my name is Austin Nicolai, and I am from the Robotic Decision-Making Laboratory at Oregon State University. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about deep learning-based methods for laser-based odometry estimation. So current state-of-the-art methods using batch processing type methods are very accurately able to reconstruct the environment and the path traveled by a laser. And so here you can see a map that was reconstructed from the Oregon State Library Quad using a Velodyne sensor. And you can see that it's a very accurate, high-fidelity model with a very accurate ground truth path for the sensor. However, when looking at doing this on the fly, using only sequential scans on potentially fieldable systems, this is a much harder problem. So we propose using deep learning-based methods and the strength that they have for feature recognition, as well as being able to perform extensive offline training, followed by faster online predictions to solve this problem. So the key idea behind what we're looking at is rather than using these vast, large space point clouds that these high-fidelity long-range sensors can give you, we're looking at actually operating only on the raw depth images obtained from the sensor. So we experimented with a lot of different network architectures for the feature extraction and the correspondence, but all of them followed the sort of the same general architecture. So we take sequential input scans from the sensor at time t-1 and t. We feed it through a feature extraction stage using convolutional networks. And then we perform correspondence using dense network layers. And then from that, we predict the odometry estimate on both the change of x, y, and then heading and theta. And so in order to train these networks, we generated a robust data set in our lab. For this, we used the Velodyne puck. If you're not familiar with this, it spins 16 lasers up to 20 hertz, has a range of 100 meters, and its accuracy is plus or minus 3 centimeters. So you can see this is a very long range and high fidelity sensor. We put this sensor on a modified TurtleBot, and we drove it around our office area as well as an open lab area to try to get a varied set of data. And then from that, we were able to obtain pairs between the scans and the ground truth odometry and generator data set. And from this, we got about 13,000 training sets and 3,000 testing sets. So below here, you can see roughly what a raw depth scan can look like. Here, it's pretty hard to see, and so if we zoom in, you can actually see more of what the features might look like in this image space. So of all the networks we tested, the most accurate we came up with over the 100 by 100 meter test area had about an average test error of 7.63 centimeters when compared to the more accurate batch reconstruction ground truth, and then a maximum test error of 61 centimeters. So it's still about 30% estimate error, which isn't as high as we'd like to get. But one nice thing from this is that we were able to predict, on average, for a scan pair, only 4.5 milliseconds. So future directions is we want to perform, as we experiment with more networks and obtain better results, perform more robust comparisons with existing state-of-the-art methods. Additionally, we want to explore more network structures, including use of LSTMs, and then go on from extending this just from a ground vehicle to full 6 degree of freedom quadcopter, as you can see here. So with that, I'd like to thank our funding sponsors, as well as invite you to come see our poster and ask more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. The next paper is detection and tracking of liquids with fully convolutional networks.
Yeah. Why is it actually a PowerPoint? It's that's in there. Yeah. I don't speak German. Full screen. Oh, is that one? Okay. All right, I'm Connor, and along with my advisor, Dieter Fox, this paper is titled Detection and Tracking of Liquids with Fully Convolutional Networks. So what our real goal is, we want robots to be able to robustly manipulate liquids. But before we can do that, robots need to first be able to both perceive and reason about liquids. And so we divide these into two different tasks. We call them the detection and the tracking tasks. So I'll define detection as the task of, given just a raw input, a raw visual image, can we find all the visible liquid in the raw image? And the tracking task is, given that we've already segmented out the raw image into different classes of objects, can we then track the liquid as it moves from container to container and is obstructed by the containers, by opaque containers? So to test this, we used Blender's fluid simulation library to render some pretty realistic looking fluid simulations. And what the nice thing about using the simulator is that we're able to get some really nice ground truth, as you can see up there. And so we tested, so we generated about 10,000 different sequences, 15-second sequences with about 4.5 million labeled images each. And we tested 3 different neural network architectures on these two tasks. We tested just a regular CNN. We also tested a multi-frame CNN that looks at a sequence of sequential frames, as well as we tested a recurrent-based neural network that used LSTMs. And so let me show you a video here. Okay. So these are 5 randomly selected sequences from our testing set. And you can see in the upper left is the network input, and then the middle in the upper part is the labels. Then across the bottom is the heat map from each of the different networks. And you can see here that all the networks at least detect that their water is there, or that the liquid is there. But interestingly enough, the recurrent neural network seems to be the most precise, which we found kind of interesting. And the one thing to note here is that the sort of single frame network, while it is able to detect the liquid, it's very it's not very consistent because it isn't able to aggregate over time. And here you can see, here's another sequence without any liquid at all, just to show you that it is actually detecting liquid and not just, say, using the angle of the cup. And you can see a bored grad student walking around in the background. So here's the same 5 sequences, but for the tracking task. So here I want to note that the input to the network is not the raw RGB image, but actually the segmented image in the center on the top. The raw RGB is just shown here so that we can see it for comparison. And you can see the goal here is to track where the water goes over time. And you'd expect the recurrent neural network to do the best in this case because it's the only one that actually has a memory. But interestingly enough, the multi-frame network in the middle on the bottom is actually able to infer quite a bit based on just the angle of the cup and its motion. But you can see like there, for example, it wasn't able to remember that the water had transferred to the bowl in that case. And so you can see here the recurrent neural network is able to remember that both there's water in the cup and in the bowl. And here again is an example without liquid for comparison. You can see the multi-frame network here gets fooled because it doesn't have any memory, so it can't remember that there is no liquid, but the recurrent neural network is able to track it. And so real quick, this actually isn't in the paper, but we got these results recently and we thought they were kind of cool and you might be interested. So we've actually tried testing this on a real robot with real data because the simulator is great, but it's not perfect. So what we did is we got a thermal camera and we used hot water and we just took this nice thermal image here. And we're actually able to threshold it to get some nice ground truth labeling. And given that, just a second, I have a video here. Yeah, can you get that folder open? Oh, there it is. Yep. Yep, so okay, so here's some just results. This is just the recurrent neural network. So just preliminary results we got on a small data set we collected with real data. And you can see here on the right are the labels we get from the thermal camera. And it actually does pretty well tracking the real water. Of course, this is, obviously overfitting because we don't have a lot of data here to train on. These are just some preliminary results, but they're really encouraging. They're kind of cool to look at. So if you're interested in these results or any of our other liquid detection or tracking stuff, come talk to me at my poster. Here's just one final one with no liquid to show you that it is able to pick up that there's no liquid there. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. And the next paper is going to be grass post detection in dense clutter using deep learning.
Hi, I'm Marcus from Northeastern University, and I'll be talking about grasping. So the problem is, given a point cloud, and there are objects represented in that point cloud, we want to find grasps on those objects. And the robot has not necessarily seen these exact object instances before, but we trained the neural network on similar objects. So the approach is, at a high level, is simple. So we first take a lot of samples of grasp poses on the object, and they have to meet some basic geometric conditions given the data that we do see from one view. And then the neural network will classify them as antipodal grasps or not. And this is important because typically we only see like the front face of the objects. We don't know that when the hand closes, there will be something back there to make contact with. So we use the Linnet model in Café, and we train using the Big Bird data set. And to get a lot of data out of this, there are only 55 objects that we use. We vary the perspectives, and on each perspective, there are a lot of samples that can be more or less automatically labeled as antipodal grasps or not. And we get the ground truth from the full mesh. This comes with Big Bird. So the representation we use is basically this 15-channel image. And that's 5 channels from 3 different perspectives. And the first information is the actual point cloud information itself, which is the picture on the left, bottom left here. And the unobserved region, which is like what is occluded from the view of the sensor. And then the surface normals. And this is all the geometry within the closing region of the hand. So this is a plot of comparison with different representations. And this is accuracy versus training iterations. And at the top is that 15-channel representation I was talking about. And then Blue is just removing the occlusion channels. And then what's perhaps more surprising is the red does pretty well, and it's just 3 channels of information, surface normals, along one projection. Okay, so we did some experiments with a Baxter research robot, and we have, well, 4 different experiments, and we achieved up to 93% success. This active case is where the arm moves over the box of clutter, and it scans the objects. So compared with the passive case, the point cloud there is more complete. So with the passive case, it's just 2 sensors mounted to the base of the robot, and so the point cloud is less complete, and it performs worse. And then no selection is without using any grasp selection heuristics, so it just randomly picks one of the grasps that the neural network thinks is good. And then no classification is sort of the opposite. You get rid of the neural network and you rely completely on that grasp selection heuristic. So if you're interested in this project, please come by our poster, and thanks for listening.
And we will move on with robust semantic segmentation using deep fusion.
Hi, my name is Tobias, and I will present the work of a colleague of mine, Abhinav Valada, who was not able to come to the United States. The work is about robust semantic segmentation using deep fusion. As we have seen in the morning, that's really important for an autonomous car who want to drive outdoor to have a semantic segmentation of the scene. Normally, one uses therefore really good images, but it could be happened then some of like good images are not available. If you look, for example, at the lower left image, then you see there sun glare. And you even want to detect where's the grass, where's the forest with this sun glare. So, if you look at photogrammetry, it's known that one can use the presence of chlorophyll to detect where is the forest environment. So why don't use this information? So we do not only take the RGB image, we also take more of the spectrum of the visible light. So we collect the data with near-infrared images, we also use the depths, and then thereby one can compute the normalized different vegetation index, the enhanced vegetation index, and a combination of near-infrared and red and green values. It is known that near-infrared is more robust to lighting changes than red, green, and blue. So if we have all these features, they have to be somehow fused together. And we present 2 strategies to fuse them together. One is early fusion, using some channel stacking, and one is late fusion for a late fused convolution. So how does our architecture look like? First of all, we have a standard 13-layer reduced VGG architecture, which somehow like contracts the image, and after contracting it, we upsample it again to getting an image of the somehow like a segmented image. Therefore, we use 5 up-convolution refinement segments. And so we have some up-sampling, rectilinear units, convolutional layers, and at the end, a softmax. So if you look now here at the left, there's an RGB image, and you see, for example, that the snow is not really detected well. So the snow is also detected as road. And that was the reason why we use somehow like more information, more of the spectrum of the light. And so here are our fusion strategies. At the top, you see the channel stacking. So we put everything together and then use our UpNet to get the segmentation. And in the second one, we train the networks separately and then combine them using some convolutional network. And you see in the lower that it's really important. For example, you see the sun glare in this image, and you also in this one here. don't know if you see it. And you cannot see it in the near infrared. A data set of RGB and NIR doesn't exist, so we collected it on our own. We use our Viona autonomous mobile robot, collected 15,000 raw images. We then densely annotated about 300 of them, and overall, it's a trajectory of 14 kilometers, sorry. And it's, of course, online, you can use it. We then also compare to state of the art. We use 3 end-to-end approaches, which were on the best for Pascal VOC leaderboard. And our approach is somehow like a little bit better than all the other approaches for detecting the sky, trail, grass, and vegetation. It's a little bit worse for the obstacles. But what is good from our approach is really 2 times faster than the best of the other approaches. You here see now a table of the results. First of all, in the upper left, you see the detection results for the individual models. You see that RGB is the best one. And what you can also see is that our fusion strategies somehow like improve it a little bit. I mean, that's a boring table, so I move on to some qualitative results. You see on the on the upper left one, you see some snow. You see that's badly detected from the RGB method. It's getting better with the channel stacking, and with the late fused convolution, you really have a good separation between the road and the grass. On the middle row, you see the sun glare. You also have it, it's bad for the RGB. It's getting a little bit better with the channel stacking, or no, in this it's getting worse, but it's really good detected with the late fused convolution. And at the end, you also see that somehow like you should use the late fused convolution if you want to get really good results. And if you want to know more about it, you can come to the poster, or you can also write a mail to Alada. So, thanks.
Thank you. And that brings us to the final paper in this session. That's titled Self-Supervised Deep Visuomotor Learning from Motor Unit Feedback.
Hi, I'm Takeshi Takahashi from University of Massachusetts Amherst. This study is collaborated with J1 and Professor Rod Gruppen. We propose an approach to simplify visual motor skill acquisition. Rather than using motor torque directly, we use the closed loop controllers so that we can reduce the action space. And then we also would like to introduce a method to self-label training examples to make the training easier. So the expensive training and the large set required are a major challenge facing the widespread use of deep learning in robotics. Robots need to physically collect the data, so it takes a lot of time, and as a grad student, I don't have much time for training robots. So in order to alleviate the issue, we looked at how infants learn motor skills, because infants' experiences are biased, and then infants don't explore whole action space randomly due to developmental reflexes. So humans are born with and develop a large set of reflexes during their development. For example, if you put something on baby's hand, the baby will grasp it. This is not an intentional action. So this video shows some example. Actually, this is my son. And grasp reflex plays an integral role because it aids in learning functionality of end effectors through tactile and visual sensations. And grasping becomes a necessary primitive for learning more complex skills. Now, one of the important and the first function of the cognitive process is to convert these reflexes into intentional actions. The goal is then learn when to and how to grasp while bootstrapping grasp reflexes. In this study, we focus on when to grasp. So how does a robot encode these reflexes into intentional actions? The robot is collecting grasping experiences through grasp reflexes like this. And it uses two controller states, converts or quiescent, for labeling, self-labeling training examples. And we train the network in supervised manner, so the robot learned when he can grasp object in terms of location, size, shape, maybe other factors. Okay, so this is the result. The top left figure shows the object used in the training, and we use new objects for testing. And then the network predicts control state, and the accuracy of the controller state prediction is 93%. So the results indicate that the learned network can be generalized for new objects. So the resulting network provides the encoding of an intentional action driven by visual stimulus. And then these videos are some demonstrations. If the robot predicts the controller will be converged or object is graspable, he attempts a grasp. And if he thinks that, okay, it is not graspable, he complains like this. And if you are interested in this work, have questions or any feedback, please visit our poster. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you very much to all the authors for sending in their work, their papers to this workshop. We will now have a break of half an hour.